Imagine driving through a small Texas town where owning a home still feels possible. Tree-lined streets, historic storefronts, front porches that have watched generations come and go. At first glance, it feels like the kind of place people spend their whole lives searching for. One of the last places where the American dream still seems within reach. But if that's true, why are so many of these towns struggling to attract new residents? Because in Texas, some of the most affordable places to live come with a hidden cost. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why the cheapest house isn't always the best deal. Across Texas, there are towns where some homes still sell for less than $100,000. On paper, it sounds like the opportunity of a lifetime. A historic home, a quiet neighborhood, tree-lined streets, more space than many families can afford in America's fastest-growing cities. At first glance, these places feel like the last corners of Texas where the American dream is still within reach. So why are so many of them struggling to attract new residents? The answer isn't one economic crisis, one factory closing, or one bad decision. Every town has its own story. One lost the visitors that once kept it alive. Another watched generations of young people leave, one graduation at a time. One helped shape modern Texas before quietly fading into the background. And another is discovering that restoring beautiful buildings is much easier than restoring opportunity. Over the next few minutes, we're traveling across Texas to uncover what really happened to these towns. Because by the end of this journey, you'll understand why the price on the listing was never the real price. The real price was everything that came after. Drive through mineral wells on a quiet morning, and you might catch yourself slowing down. The old brick buildings are still there. The cafes still have regulars coming in for coffee. And above downtown, the Baker Hotel still rises over the streets like it remembers a different version of this town. From the outside, it almost looks like a place people forgot to appreciate, especially when you realize some homes here still cost far less than they would in the towns closer to Fort Worth. So why isn't everyone trying to move here? To understand that, you have to understand what mineral wells used to be. More than a century ago, people came here for one reason: the water. They believed the mineral springs could heal them. And they didn't just come from nearby towns. They came from across Texas. Some came from much farther than that. They arrived by train, checked into hotels, walked the streets, ate in local restaurants, and spent money in the shops. For a while, Mineral Wells wasn't just a small town, it was a destination. Then, in 1929, the Baker Hotel opened, 14 stories tall, grand, elegant. The kind of building that tells you a town believed in its own future. And for a while, it was right to believe. But then the world changed. People didn't need to travel across the country for mineral water anymore. Medicine changed. Travel habits changed. And slowly, the crowds stopped coming. The hotels had empty rooms. Restaurants got quieter. Storefronts that had once been busy for decades started going dark. It wasn't one dramatic collapse. It was slower than that. One family moved away. Then another. One business closed. Then another. The buildings stayed exactly where they were. The people slowly stopped filling them. Today, Mineral Wells is trying to come back. The Baker Hotel is being restored. Old buildings are getting new life. New businesses are opening downtown. And when you walk through the streets now, you can feel that the town hasn't given up on itself. But that's the thing about places like this. You can restore a hotel. You can repaint a storefront. You can bring life back to a street. But rebuilding opportunity, that takes much longer. And that's what many buyers don't see at first. The house might be affordable. The life around it is the harder part. Hundreds of miles west of here, another Texas town proves that same point in a completely different way. Because there, the problem isn't what disappeared, it's how far away everything still is. If mineral wells makes you wonder what happens when a town loses the thing that made it famous, Fort Davis asks a completely different question. How far would you go for the perfect place to live? The first thing you notice isn't the town, it's the drive. The highways get quieter. The mountains start rising out of the desert. The air feels cooler. And before you know it, you're looking at a part of Texas that doesn't feel like Texas at all. When the sun finally goes down, the stars take over. Not a handful of stars, thousands of them. The kind of night sky most people only see in photographs. It's easy to understand why people fall in love with this place. It feels peaceful, uncrowded, like you've escaped the noise of modern life. For a little while, it almost feels perfect. Then, Monday morning arrives. You need a specialist, or a big grocery run. Maybe you're looking for a new job, and suddenly, those quiet roads don't feel quite so charming anymore. Out here, almost everything takes longer. The things most people take for granted, a hospital, major shopping, a wider choice of careers, can all mean another long drive. That's the trade-off. Fort Davis never lost what made it special. The mountains are still here. The history is still here. The night sky is still just as incredible. What hasn't changed is how far away everything else can feel. That's the challenge with towns like this. The house might fit your budget. The view might be unforgettable. But eventually, every beautiful drive becomes part of your daily routine. And that's a very different experience from visiting for a weekend. Fort Davis reminds us that affordable doesn't always mean forgotten. Sometimes it simply means making choices that most people aren't willing to make. And the next town tells an even quieter story. Not about distance, not about scenery, but about a place that slowly watched one generation after another build their future somewhere else. Some towns don't empty out all at once. They get quieter 1 year at a time. That's what happened in Quanah. At first, nothing about it looks dramatic. The courthouse is still there. Main Street still has its old storefronts. The roads are wide and calm. And if you didn't know the history, you might think this was simply another quiet Texas town. But Quanah used to be much more than that. Named after Quanah Parker, the famous Comanche leader, this town grew around the railroad. And when the trains were running, everything moved through here. Cotton, cattle, wheat, people, money. For a long time, the railroad didn't just pass through Quanah. It gave the town a reason to believe in tomorrow. Families opened stores. Farmers brought crops into town. Children grew up assuming there would still be work nearby when they got older. And for a while, there was. Then the country started changing around it. Highways took over. Farms got bigger. Machines did work that once took whole crews of people. And young adults started doing what young adults do when the next opportunity is somewhere else. They left. For college, for military service, for Dallas, Fort Worth, Amarillo, or wherever life seemed to be opening a door. Most didn't leave angry. They just didn't come back. And that's the part that changes a town. Not one disaster, not one headline, just one graduating class after another, slowly disappearing from the future. One moving truck, one closed shop, one smaller classroom, then another. The town didn't lose its history. It still has that. What it lost was the feeling that the next generation would build its life here too. That's why homes in a place like Quanah can still look surprisingly affordable. The buildings are there, the streets are there, the story is there. But a home is more than 4 walls and a roof. It's the life around it. And in Quanah, that's the part that became harder to hold on to. The next town is different. There, the problem wasn't that opportunity disappeared, it was that success moved on without it. By now, you might expect every affordable town to look like it's been left behind. Corsicana breaks that pattern. Spend a few minutes walking through downtown, and it doesn't feel like a place that's struggling. The old brick buildings have been restored, restaurants are busy, local shops still draw people in from the sidewalk. It feels alive. In fact, if someone told you this had once been one of the most important cities in Texas, you'd probably believe them, because they wouldn't be wrong. Back in 1894, just outside Corsicana, Texas struck oil for the first time on a commercial scale. Almost overnight, everything changed. Workers poured into town, new businesses opened, families built, homes believing they had found the place where their future would begin. For years, Corsicana stood at the center of one of the biggest economic stories Texas had ever seen. But opportunity has a habit of moving. As the decades passed, the oil industry expanded into other parts of the state. Larger cities kept growing, new companies followed, new jobs followed, and little by little, so did the people. The surprising part is that Corsicana never became a ghost town. Far from it. People still care about this place. Downtown still has energy. The history is still visible everywhere you look. That's what makes it different. Affordable doesn't always mean abandoned. Sometimes it simply means the spotlight moved somewhere else. The town is still standing. It just isn't growing the way the biggest cities around it are. And when young families start thinking about the next 20 years instead of the next 20 months, that's often enough to send them somewhere else. Corsicana reminds us that a town doesn't have to fail before people begin looking beyond it. Sometimes, it simply gets left behind by growth. And the next town tells an even more personal story. Because there, the buildings never lost their charm. The question was whether that charm alone could convince the next generation to stay. Some towns are easy to explain. A factory closes, a railroad leaves, an industry fades. Brownwood is different. Nothing here looks like it suddenly went wrong. Drive through town, and you still see the pieces of a solid Texas community. A downtown with old buildings that still have life in them. Neighborhood streets that feel calm. A university, parks, schools, a hospital that serves the wider region. On paper, Brownwood seems like the kind of place that should be growing faster than it is. So why are homes here still so much more affordable than in the cities everyone keeps moving to? The answer isn't that Brownwood fell apart. It didn't. The answer is that Texas grew around it. Over the last few decades, Dallas, Fort Worth, Austin, and San Antonio pulled in the new companies, the new jobs, the new subdivisions, the new families, and places like Brownwood were left trying to hold on to a slower version of life. For some people, that sounds perfect. A quieter morning, a familiar grocery store, neighbors who still wave when they drive by. But if you're 22 and trying to start a career, or 35 and wondering where your kids will work someday, the question starts to change. Not, is this a good place? But, will there still be enough here for us 10 years from now? That's the question small towns like Brownwood have to answer, because many of the things people say they want are still here. The schools are here. The hospital is here. The neighborhoods are here. The sense of community is here. But the next generation is harder to keep. Some leave for college and come back. Many don't. And over time, that changes a place more than any single disaster ever could. Brownwood wasn't left behind because it failed. It was left behind because growth chose somewhere else. And the next Texas town shows how even beautiful streets and historic homes can't always solve that problem. If you drove into Palestine without knowing anything about it, you'd probably assume homes here cost a fortune. Tree-lined streets, grand Victorian houses, a downtown filled with historic buildings that seem untouched by time. It's the kind of place that makes you slow down. The kind of town where you can picture yourself spending Saturday mornings at a local coffee shop, or sitting on a wide front porch as the sun starts to go down. For a moment, it feels like you found one of Texas's best-kept secrets. Then you look at the home prices, and they're far lower than you expected. So what's the catch? It isn't the houses, it isn't the streets, and it certainly isn't the history. For more than a century, Palestine grew as an important railroad town and trading center for East Texas. The trains brought jobs, the jobs brought families, and the families built a community that still gives this town much of its character today. But like so many places we've already visited, the world kept changing. Railroads became less important, businesses moved, new industries grew somewhere else, and little by little, so did the opportunities. The beautiful homes stayed, the old oak trees stayed, the historic downtown stayed. But for many young families, the reasons to build a future here became harder to find. That's what makes Palestine so fascinating. It still looks like the kind of place people dream about moving to. And for some people, it absolutely is. But if someone handed you the keys to one of these beautiful homes tomorrow, you'd probably ask the same question every family eventually asks. What happens after we move in? Because buying the house is only the beginning. Building a life is the part that takes much more than a low price. And the final 2 towns in this journey tell a different story altogether. Not about places that were left behind, but about communities still trying to shape what comes next. By this point, it might start to feel like every affordable town is just trying to hold on to what it used to be. Sweetwater feels different. Drive into town, and at first, you see the familiar things. Old buildings, quiet streets, a downtown that still carries pieces of its past. But then you look past the rooftops, and there they are. Wind turbines, not 1 or 2, hundreds of them, stretching across the horizon like a new kind of skyline. For a town like Sweetwater, that matters, because for generations, places like this depended on agriculture, ranching, and energy jobs that didn't need as many people as they once did. The work changed, the machines changed, the number of people needed changed, and slowly, small towns all across West Texas had to ask the same question. What do we do next? Sweetwater found one answer in the wind. From a distance, it sounds like the perfect comeback story. A new industry, new investment, a new reason to believe the future might still belong here. And in some ways, that's true. But when you talk about rebuilding a town, money is only part of the story. Wind farms can change a skyline. They can bring leases, tax revenue, and investment. But they don't automatically bring back every job that disappeared. They don't fill every classroom. They don't make every young person decide to stay. That's what makes Sweetwater interesting. It isn't giving up. It isn't frozen in the past. It's trying to build something new. But the question is whether that future will be big enough for the people who grew up here. Because these towns aren't just competing with each other anymore. They're competing with every fast-growing city in America. And that may be the hardest fight of all. As we reach the final town, one thing becomes harder to ignore. Every place we visited looks different. Different streets, different histories, different reasons for becoming affordable. But they all seem to point to the same truth. A home can still be affordable. Building a future is what became expensive. By the time you reach Vernon, the pattern is hard to miss. At first, it looks like a normal Texas town. Wide streets, older neighborhoods, a downtown that still has shape and history, schools, parks, local businesses. Nothing about it screams abandoned. Nothing about it feels like a ghost town. And that is exactly what makes Vernon interesting. If you were just passing through, you might ask yourself the same question we've been asking this whole time. Why are homes here still so affordable? The answer is not one big disaster. It is a collection of smaller changes. For generations, towns like Vernon helped hold rural Texas together. Agriculture, manufacturing, regional trade. These were the kinds of industries that gave families a reason to stay. A job nearby, a school for the kids, a house they could afford, a future that felt close enough to reach. But then the world started changing. Work changed. Technology changed. The biggest opportunities began gathering around larger cities, and places like Vernon had to compete with a version of America that was moving faster than they were. The town did not disappear. The people did not stop caring. But the path that once seemed obvious became harder to follow. Stay here, build a life here, raise your children here. For many families, that used to feel like the natural choice. Now, it feels like a much bigger question. And maybe that is the real lesson of these towns. They are not cheap because they are worthless. They are affordable because life around them became more complicated. The house is still here. The street is still here. The town is still here. But the future that once surrounded it is harder to see. And that is why places like Vernon matter. They remind us that every affordable house has a story. You just have to look past the price tag to find it. After visiting these towns, one thing becomes clear. Cheap houses were never the real story. Every place we visited looked different. Some were shaped by water, some by distance, some by oil, railroads, tourism, or industries that faded slowly enough that people barely noticed at first. But they all had one thing in common. At some point, the future they were built for began to change. Not overnight. Not because the people stopped caring, but because the world around them kept moving. And that is what makes these towns so fascinating. They are not failures. They are reminders. Reminders that opportunity can move faster than the people and places built around it. So the next time you see a beautiful old house in a quiet town with a surprisingly low price, don't just ask, "Why is it so cheap?" Ask, "What story brought it here?" Because behind every affordable town, there is a chapter of America most people drive past without ever noticing. And this is only one state.